Hey everyone, I'm Legion, and I'm here with my co-host Nathan Bashez.
How's it going?
This is Means of Creation, our podcast where we are talking about the passion economy and the future of work.
And it is brought to you by Every, a writer collective that's focused on business.
Our guest for this episode is Alex Kantrowitz. Why did we think that it was important to have him on the show as a guest?
Well, I've been a fan of Alex's work for a long time. And, when he was at BuzzFeed and now that he's an independent, journalist kind of doing his own thing on Substack. And I just always like that sort of, he's got this perspective that's both from analyzing what the big tech companies are doing and why. Like he, in his book, talks about how he went and talked to Mark Zuckerberg about the decisions that Facebook are making. And he really understands kind of what makes these companies tick. But also, he's got this perspective of an individual creator. And so he can kind of connect the dots in a way that I think very few can.
Exactly. And we went into this conversation with a really key question in our minds, which is a question that I get asked all the time, which is why is the creator economy suddenly this huge deal to all of these big tech companies?
Right. Like, why now?
Exactly. They've had creators on their platforms for ever since they started existing, but it seems like something has really palpably shifted in just the past year or so, where all of these big tech companies are newly paying attention to and serving the needs of creators first and foremost. So we thought Alex would be the perfect person to discuss this with, given that he's been studying their inner workings for a really long time. He wrote Always Day One. And beyond that, he also brings the perspective of an independent creator.
Yeah, I think you're going to love this episode if you're interested in kind of like the big tech perspective, particularly Facebook and Twitter, to some extent also the others like YouTube and Amazon. But really we go in kind of deep on like what Twitter's doing, what Twitter Spaces, the opportunities available in podcasting, like what Spotify is doing. There's just a lot of interesting ground that we cover.
So I hope you enjoy this episode. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on with you, Lee and Nathan. I'm a fan of both of your work, and I'm thrilled to be able to get a chance to speak with you about this stuff.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I read your stuff, and I think that what you're both doing is exactly where things are going. And I look at, your writing and your decisions for inspiration for my own business. So
wow.
Thanks again for the opportunity.
Okay, so I wanted to start our conversation off with a question that I've been getting a lot recently, and I never really know how to answer this, which is what has changed in the past few years within big tech companies to make the creator economy such a hot topic? Like, why are they paying attention to creators now more so than ever before? These big social platforms have been around for a long time. Creators have existed for as long as they've existed. But what has changed to make the creator economy a thing now?
So with social platforms, I think they've gone through an evolution where we originally thought that user-generated content would be simple and people would just create lots of stuff and their algorithms would sort it and that would be it. And they wouldn't really have to put any effort in terms of developing the people that are actually creating that content. What we found was that a small percentage of the population is actually able to make stuff that a larger percentage of the population wants to consume. And there is a market for stuff like friends and family posts like you'll see on Instagram or Facebook. By and large, I think the platforms have understood that they're in competition for creators. And I think this really began with the death of Vine, where if you remember, Vine was the hottest social app on the planet for a minute. And the creators do it for the Vine. The creators got smart about it. They went to Twitter and they said, your app is being powered by a handful of us. And we like your app, but you need to pay us because you're getting all of the economic benefit of this and we're not getting any of it. And Twitter said no. And what happened was all those people left Twitter and they went to YouTube and they went to Snapchat, and then Vine fell apart and Twitter had to shut it down. It could not recover from that type of blow. So I think that was I think all social platforms paid attention to that and realized that they have to really roll the red carpet out for creators because they're going to end up making their platforms compelling. And so now you're starting to see that, from everything from TikTok, I think they have a creators fund. Clubhouse, they have, Clubhouse is trying to do their own version of this. And we're starting to see it trickle into things like, well, we talked about social audio, but newsletters as well, with stuff like, Twitter's play on integrating review and then eventually introducing the super follow. And Facebook, of course, there's been rumors that Facebook wants to do its own newsletter platform. It's definitely doing its social audio platform. And I think that all these companies are extremely competitive, and they know that they need to give people a reason to actually go and create content on their platforms. They're not just going to show up and make it because the tools exist. And so we're starting to see a maturation in that type of world where all of a sudden the people that are creating the content matter a lot more than the products.
It sounds like the core driver of the story is basically it's driven by user preference. Where do we put our attention? It seems like we're putting it towards stuff that was created by someone who's kind of specialized more often than we used to. Whereas it used to be kind of like, just your friend that was firing off a quick photo from like a trip or something, someone else firing off a quick video of them doing something funny or whatever, like even though you don't know them, is like maybe more interesting, or someone, making a joke or whatever. Like there's lots of different mediums to try it. But is that sort of just the core thing, is like the early days of social media were built around stuff from people and it turns out that's just less interesting than stuff from people who are interesting?
I would say that's half right. I think that the early days of social media were built around stuff from people and the idea is like people involved. Like I was working in marketing before I went into journalism, and I wrote the deck for the company I was at about why we should go on Facebook and not MySpace. And the idea that there were brands and news publishers and any other specialized form of content going on social media in the early days was ludicrous. And it had to be socialized internally inside an organization, for them to even, give it some thought. And this wasn't too long ago. I mean, I was making these decks in like 2009, 2008, and 2010. So we're in 2021 now. It's like we're 10, 11, 12 years into this thing actually being mainstream. So I think what's happened is we have moved to this specialized. We've moved to having more attention on specialized things like people like Clubhouse creators and Vine creators and all that stuff, and brands and news organizations on these platforms, because just the aperture of social media has expanded, right? Because now instead of just having a Facebook news feed where you post pictures of you coming home drunk from a college party,
right?
We've migrated a lot of content creation, a lot of our communication, a lot of our entertainment onto social media platforms. And so this expansion has led to the development of more creation and more expectation, frankly, from a consumer standpoint.
I think this is a really interesting topic, and I completely agree with your sort of assessment of how the big tech companies are now kind of like waking up to the fact that the creators really matter to their core platform. They're the drivers of value for the end consumers, and therefore they need to be compensated and served and like valued accordingly. I think this raises, though, an interesting question, especially for me with my investor hat on, looking at startups all day in the creator economy, which is like, are the startups who are trying to build better creator monetization tools, are they a sustaining innovation that would be better capitalized on by the big tech companies? They can just be, they're basically creating features that can be grafted on to the big tech companies, or are they truly disruptive? And are they doing something that, is going to be neglected and kind of overlooked by the big social platforms? And the more that I think about this question, the more that I have come to believe that a lot of the startups in the space are actually building sustaining innovations that would be better off if they were housed as part of the larger social platforms. Because if we think of creator monetization as a funnel, monetization basically sits at the bottom of the funnel and discovery sits on top. And the big social platforms are the best places to go in order to be discovered. But I'm curious to get your thoughts here on sustaining versus disruptive innovation, and like, what is the place of these startups that are trying to better serve creators?
Yeah, it's really hard to be a startup and do that. And your job is very difficult because you have to sort of pick out the ones that you think can actually have staying power versus the ones that will get scooped up by the platforms. There's advantages and disadvantages. The one nice thing about being a startup is you don't have any of the legacy burden, and you can really serve the whole market as opposed to having to wonder about your legacy products. Let me give you an example. So Apple is now introducing paid subscriptions to its podcast product, which is great. But because Apple is so maniacally focused on keeping the iPhone market the way that it is, it's restricted those podcast subscriptions to its iPhone users only, people out using Apple Podcasts. So if you're building something, let's say you're a Supercast, which does subscription podcast monetization that works across platforms, you have an advantage against Apple because you can offer podcast creators the ability to do paid subscriptions, not just on Apple Podcasts, but on Overcast and Spotify and all the rest. So that's an example where a startup does have an opportunity to capitalize on the limitations that a bigger technology company would place on itself because it cares more about its legacy product than the new product that it's building. For the life of me, I can't understand why some of the big tech companies like Apple, don't see this and realize that they're susceptible.
Right.
But it just happens to be the case that they're often very slow to figure this out, and they have this, big, massive legacy business, in all the big tech companies' cases, nearing $1 trillion businesses or above, sometimes two, and they're very slow to actually, come to work every day and build the best product for the market and not the thing that's going to sustain their legacy product. I mean, that's kind of what I was getting at with the book title, Always Day One, is that the big companies that do this well come to work and they don't care about legacy. A company like Amazon will happily cannibalize everything that it's doing if it thinks that the market is bigger, and it wants to be the one that builds that. But not every big tech company will do that, such as Apple. With the Apple example, it's perfect encapsulation of the big incumbents' slowness to move. So I think that's where the opportunities are going to be generally.
Yeah. Specifically with Apple, I think I'm really surprised that they're not doing Apple Podcast Plus, where it's like the same thing as Apple TV Plus, where it's centrally funded. They're funding high production value stuff. For Apple to fund like a high production value podcast would just be such a drop in the bucket because the cost, I mean, they've done some, but like, I'm surprised they're not doing more basically. And that's not more of the focus because the creator monetization angle is just so rough for them. Like they don't want to give up any control. It's like creators want it to be across platforms. Apple doesn't, but for Apple to just be like, cool, here's $1 million to make a podcast, and to just do that like 50 times would be seriously nothing for Apple cash wise, but would be really meaningful in the podcast market.
I think you're spot on. I think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to start to see a competition between Apple and Spotify for original podcast content.
Yeah.
And that's going to be really exciting. Yeah. So Apple, I just, this past week, I just listened to Apple's first, I think Apple Original or Apple TV Plus Original podcast. I don't know exactly how they categorize it. It's a podcast called The Line, and it's about these Navy SEALs that were accused of war crimes and actually went to trial. And the podcaster actually goes and sits with the people who are in the platoon and, gives like a history of the Navy SEALs. And honestly, it's one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. And it came right out of Apple's production arm. So I think that was a way for them to test what they're going to do in the future. And I think you're spot on. I think this is where things are going. And creator monetization doesn't seem like something that's going to work for them, at least from my vantage point.
And it fits into the larger Apple One bundle. I forget what it's called, but it's their big bundle where you get fitness and Apple Music and extra storage for like photos and stuff. It's just like this big bundle. And I think it makes total sense for Apple to approach it more like a Netflix or like Amazon Prime Video, where it's just like, here, services revenue galore. We'll spend a lot of fixed costs and make it up by having just this subscription that lots of people can access. And that creates a sustainable competitive advantage because they have this, fixed cost structure that's like, how many other companies can just like invest, $50 million in original podcast production? Like not very many.
Not many.
And like, even though it seems like Amazon wants to do this, like they bought or are buying Wondery, big podcast production studio, but like, what's their channel? Like there's no audio channel that Amazon, I guess they have Audible, but like, it feels like different. They don't have a podcast app.
Yeah, I think that with Amazon, it's just a case of them throwing whatever they can against the wall and seeing what will stick.
Yeah.
With Apple, they have a difficult sell. Amazon Prime is an easy sell. Sign up to Prime, you get free shipping in a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
The Apple Prime or whatever they call it, it's a more difficult sell because it's like, all right, you'll get storage. All right, people don't really see the benefit of storage in their day to day. You might get some content. Well, there's Netflix and Prime and HBO and Showtime out there. Maybe you get some great original podcasts. So it's much more meaningful for Apple than it is for an Amazon, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. That is interesting. What Apple should do is offer, like, you can skip the line on when the new iPhone comes out. Like, they give it to their subscribers first.
That would be, I mean, you'd end up, if they did that, you'd end up hitting like the true fans and the early adopters anyway.
Right.
That would be smart, but you'd piss everybody else off.
That's true.
Not that Apple cares. Apple seems to be fine with making decisions that make people angry. So
I want to pull us out of this Apple hole for a little bit and move on to another big tech company, Facebook. So you've been recently covering the Facebook Oversight Board, which I think is really interesting. Maybe just quickly for the folks in the audience who aren't familiar with the Facebook Oversight Board and like what it's been making decisions about recently, could you just quickly summarize that?
Absolutely. So Facebook has this thing called the Oversight Board, and the Oversight Board makes decisions on content moderation choices that Facebook has, and it is a group of, I think, 39 members. It will go up to, maybe a couple dozen more than that, that Facebook has selected. And they are, they don't work for Facebook. They're paid through trust. And when Facebook has really tough content moderation choices that it doesn't want to make itself, it can refer them to the board. And then these independent, quote unquote, quasi-independent members will make the decision, and they have final say. So, if Facebook is going to keep this thing legitimate, when the Oversight Board rules on a decision, it's their choice and their choice alone that sticks. So one of the things that the board was recently tasked with was evaluating the indefinite suspension that Facebook put on Donald Trump's access to his accounts after the January 6th riots. And it was really interesting because essentially Facebook said, we're going to suspend Trump indefinitely, and they referred it to the board saying, all right, give this a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Do you approve it, or do you strike down the suspension? And the Oversight Board went back to Facebook and said, we're not going to do either of those because you pulled this rule out of a hat. It doesn't exist anywhere. And so if you want us to actually make decisions, you're going to actually have to write real rules as opposed to have us rubber stamp the things that you do on a whim. And so now that decision is back with Facebook, and they'll eventually, make a rule or, actually try to, find some structure versus this ambiguous, indefinite suspension, and then the board will rule again. So there's a lot of controversy around it. People say that it's, a group that is offloading that Facebook is offloading its responsibility on, and it's a red herring meant for us to look at, as if Facebook is a democracy where we know that it's literally just the kingdom.
I compared it to the French Revolution's Revolutionary Tribunal on Twitter, like the semblance of justice and democracy, when really it's a handpicked small number of people that Facebook selected.
Yes. So I think that viewed without the proper context, it can be looked at as a destructive institution. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just a cynical play for Facebook to try to offload any responsibility and make everybody think it's good and doing the right thing. It's possible. But I also think the institution itself is a step in the right direction. And, you have like three categories of people that could be making content decisions on Facebook. You have Facebook alone, you have the government, and then you have, some form of quasi-independent board like the Facebook Oversight Board. And I think it's probably the least bad option.
I think there's a fourth option, which is maybe turning it over to the users.
Well, Facebook's done that in the past.
Really?
In the early days, Facebook let users make some vote. They tossed over, I forgot whether it was content moderation or policy or product decisions, that they tossed over to the user base and allowed people to vote in a poll on the newsfeed. and participation was actually extremely
Yeah.
low. And so they did away
I
with it.
see.
But I actually like what Lee's saying here.
Yeah.
Maybe we do, go full democracy on this bad boy and turn it over to the users.
I think so, because ultimately they are the stakeholders that are impacted by whatever decision, is made. Like, they're the ones who have to use the platform.
Could you imagine the campaigning that would
Oh
go
my
on?
gosh, it would be really
Oh,
good
It'd be
for
really good for
Facebook's
engagement.
engagement
the
numbers.
The ad platform would go bonkers.
Yeah,
So.
I really like so you laid out in one of your recent newsletters kind of like the both sides of the argument. The Facebook Oversight Board is a scam was one argument. The Facebook Oversight Board is good is the other argument. And I thought that was a really balanced take. But I want to ask you what your personal view is and what you like, which side of that debate you're on, and what you think is the ideal solution.
Well, I am for it. I think that this is a good thing to try. Generally, I've been in some of the Facebook content moderation decisions, the meetings, and I think that I can't reveal like the specific content because there's some agreement around that, but it was very interesting to see how they work. And I think that oftentimes companies with elaborate content moderation apparatuses can create an illusion for themselves that they're actually working in a fair and democratic way. And I think that offloading as much of that as possible outside of Menlo Park offices or whatever Facebook, Zoom councils is probably the best way to do it. I don't think the Oversight Board is perfect. Obviously, Zuckerberg helped design the bylaws, helped pick the members. So it's still Facebook in a sense. But ultimately, I think that we do want some form of independent bodies making these decisions, whether it is the Oversight Board or potentially the full user base, like you suggest, Lee.
Yeah.
And we got to try it. I think that there's been so much reactionary anti-Facebook sentiment floating out there in the world. A lot of it merited, but some of it just knee-jerk. And I think that that's been, by and large, the reason why we've seen so much negative sentiment around this experiment. But ultimately, I think it's a worthy experiment, and we can see where it goes, and potentially the outside voices will help shape its direction, and I think they already have. In some ways, I saw the Trump decision as the board responding to some of the criticism, saying that they're just there to rubber stamp Facebook's decision. And it was interesting that the board went back to Facebook and said, not good enough, do better. And then we'll make a decision. And so I think that they are, Facebook did give them some power, and I think they're making the most of that power. And that's encouraging to me.
I do like that the incentive, it would seem to me, of the people on there now is to say, hey, if our institution that we're obviously bought into because we're working on it is going to be respected, we're going to have to flex some of our power. And we can't just go with what Facebook wants. Otherwise, because everyone kind of expects it to be a little bit of a sham. So it's kind of on them to prove otherwise. So I kind of like that they're biased against supporting Facebook's decisions, basically. Yeah. Cause I don't know, I think it'd be interesting. But to me, the larger thing, this is a separate idea that I'm curious if you see this having any chance of working or coming to exist. But I feel like we need something kind of like the United Nations for social platforms, where maybe because this is across all platforms, this behavior. There's coordinated activity that happens on Discord, and then people brigade someone on Twitter, or there's a YouTube video that goes viral on Facebook, or there's just all sorts of cross-platform behavior. And I do think that there needs to be more of a coordinated body that has transparent deliberations. The UN Security Council has meetings, and reporters can observe them and report on them, and we can sort of know why they're making the decisions there. Obviously, these platforms are, to some extent, there's cross talk, right? But I think probably everyone's really worried about, I don't know what they might be worried about of why not to coordinate these things, but it's not the kind of thing where you get a huge competitive advantage out of your moderation decisions. This is more it's positive and negative externalities for society that we all have a stake in, and we all want to see action on, because it feels like the internet is not safe enough or good enough for what most people want. So I don't know. I'm curious if you see any sort of cross, platform coordination happening.
There's already some cross-platform coordination. They share image hashes, I believe, for stuff like terrorist recruitment and child pornography. So if these images appear on Twitter, Facebook and Google will be able to recognize them and take them down. Some sort of collaboration like that exists. The broader coordination is tricky because I think that people might end up saying that there's this conspiratorially minded central body that's conspiring to take down the type of content that they do. I think that we should allow them to talk and compare notes on this stuff. But I also kind of think that like market outcomes are also a good, like being able to do this in a market where each company can kind of come up with their own solution and see how their user bases react and learn is a pretty good way to go about it. Like the fact that Facebook suspended Trump indefinitely, but Twitter, but threw it to Oversight Board, but Twitter completely banned him. And watching how society and the world reacts to these two different types of approaches, as opposed to having one centralized approach, might be good in the end.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I'm just thinking back on this conversation that we recently had with Kat Tenbarge, who's a reporter at Insider. And we were discussing how a lot of creators today have this kind of they have this kind of goal in the back of their minds as they're creating content and building their public brand, which is to become uncancelable. And they try to cultivate this uncancelability by always towing the line and kind of building their brand in a way such as to cultivate such a loyal base of followers and so they can never be canceled. And
right. And to kind of vaccinate their followers against the idea that they're like angels, like they'll like intentionally toe the line so that they sort of develop a reputation for like whatever, being edgy. And then when something bad comes out, like with the New York Times reporting that Taylor Lorenz did on Jake Paul's behavior, everyone was like, all right, makes sense. Like I could see him doing that. And so it didn't really end up damaging him very much because the people who support him already, were kind of vaccinated against that story.
I don't think if you're a Jake Paul fan, you're looking for him to be a role model for proper behavior.
And I think it's interesting because Donald Trump is like someone that comes to mind as someone who is very much uncancelable. Like his supporters very much expect his behavior and are never, they never find it abhorrent or appalling or anything like that. And so in this situation, I think it could have really only taken something like Facebook as a platform or the Facebook Oversight Board or this like entity to unilaterally make a decision to deplatform someone.
Wait, so in terms of like, when you say that, and related, when that's related to the uncancelability of someone, so are you saying that the Oversight Board does have the ability to cancel someone?
Or Facebook does. Like the only
Facebook does.
Like for some of these creators, I'm calling Donald Trump a creator now.
Yes. Well, I mean that's not really far off, honestly. Creator in chief.
Right. Like the only way that they can be canceled is through platform's actions.
Right.
Yeah. This is why I love email, by the way. And podcasts and email.
Snail mail.
You can't snail mail, although the post office knows, but. Right. You can't get canceled on email because you can get unsubscribed to. But when you talk about if you look at a platform to mediate your relationships with your the people who are reading your work or listening to your songs or engaging with your tweets or watching your videos, you're inherently at a disadvantage. A, you're going to be paying a tech tax no matter what. In some way, shape, or form. And B, if they decide to turn off the spigot or ban your account or change the algorithm, you're toast. And I think I wrote this on Twitter, but like for a journalist, an email, someone giving you an email address is the most important thing that they could ever do, is the most valuable thing they could do. Because as once you start making this connection via email, it doesn't matter what else happens. You will have that audience and that connection. And I think that's, in my perspective, one way to be uncancelable. And, just bringing it full circle, it's funny to me that Twitter and Facebook are now, getting their email and podcast or whatever social audio efforts underway, because a lot of this movement towards these formats has been a reaction to the fickleness of the social algorithms and a
Mm-hmm.
desire for people to insulate themselves from, the up and down decisions that Facebook and Twitter might make. And so, yeah, it's just interesting to see, hey, what about us? Well, a lot of people went this other way because they saw what you were doing and didn't want to be subject to it anymore. So it'll be a very interesting battle. We'll see how that will play out.
Yeah, totally. It's funny because I think that there's sort of like, there's the thing about email that's like, it's almost like on the level of crypto where it's like, it's totally decentralized, and, like there are big players like Gmail, where if Gmail decides they want to start filtering messages coming from you, then it's going to be hard to reach a lot of people, but still to some degree you can operate. And then there's this like more practical thing, which is just like, when I tweet my article, I don't know what percent of my followers are going to see it, but it's like way less than the percent of people that get an email from me when I publish a new post. And so I feel like social platforms could almost kneecap a lot of the movement to email by just having better ways of ensuring delivery. Like Twitter has the like turn on mobile notifications thing, but like I just feel like platforms could do better to be like, and YouTube does this too, where you've got the like you can turn on alerts or whatever when there's new posts. But I feel like that's the main reason why people are moving to email, not sort of this like crypto-esque like it never goes away type philosophy. It's just literally like, what percent of my following is going to see when I post.
Yeah, totally. And you when you're publishing something on like a social platform, the people can see the link, then they have to click the link, then they actually have to read. Whereas with an email, it just comes right into your inbox and it's there. So even though like my Twitter following is 3 times the size of my email list, I'll have thousands more people read the email versus click the link.
Totally. Well, I want to, before we shift to talking about your strategy as a creator, which I think it'll be a good, fascinating kind of like second segment of the conversation, I wanted to ask kind of about, because we touched on social audio just briefly before, and like we also touched on, I think, a related question to it, which is it a sustaining innovation relative to Twitter? Like basically, is Clubhouse a sustaining innovation for existing social networks, or is it a disruptive innovation? And the Clay Christensen analysis is basically like, does it add more value to the types of people who are already using the incumbent's product? Like, does it plug right in? And I think the answer is yes. And I think you do too, because you kind of like
trouble
at the peak of Clubhouse Mania, wrote a post where you were bullish on Twitter Spaces. So I'm curious, just like taking a step back, like what's like sort of the big picture to you of live audio right now?
Yeah, so I got in a lot of trouble. My mentions were like totally unmanageable for a week after I wrote that people working to build followings on Clubhouse were wasting their time, and this was going to be a feature on Twitter. And that seems to be proving out pretty well, where Clubhouse has hit some trouble. The app feels quieter and more boring than it ever has before. And, I don't know if Twitter Spaces necessarily has like supplanted it yet, but it does feel a lot more natural to join a Twitter Space than it does to, open up Clubhouse and start something or see, something and start it. I don't know. I mean, I'm obviously like my perspective is obviously a little skewed because I have an audience on Twitter and I use Twitter pretty frequently, and so it's much easier for me to build a space there versus something on Clubhouse. And people have argued, yes, it's precisely because the blue check marks aren't on Clubhouse, which is why Clubhouse is good. But I'm going to go back to my earlier point, which is that like creating content is hard, and there's only a small segment of the population that is able to do it well, that are able to moderate these conversations well. And there's a lot of overlap with the people, who've been able to do this professionally, whether that's as journalists or media personalities or, have followings on Twitter due to their insights on startups and stuff like that. So that's a long way of me saying I'm as bearish as I ever have been on Clubhouse, and think it's way overvalued, and I go in there, fairly frequently out of curiosity, and am very often underwhelmed by what I see. Although there are moments where I'll see some cool stuff. Like yesterday, I went in and saw, Palestinians and Israelis speaking with each other, and they had this like open forum, and that's like one of those special moments on social media that make you say, "Oh, this is kind of cool." And every social platform has had that. Facebook has had those special moments. Twitter has had those special moments, and now they're occurring on Clubhouse, and that's pretty cool. But long story short, I'm bearish on Clubhouse. I think it will fade into the background of social media and be largely forgotten fairly soon. I think it's a very good feature on Twitter. We'll see what will happen on Facebook. I don't think it will be as impressive with Facebook, but never bet against Facebook in the social space. And yeah, so I would say if you're talking about disruptive versus sustaining innovation, I just think that this isn't going to be something that's going to disrupt the social platforms or even podcasting all that much. I initially was like, oh God, what's this going to do to podcasting?
Right.
I just launched a podcast and now everyone's going to spend their time on Clubhouse, but I haven't seen, much of a blip at all in the numbers after Clubhouse's height. So I'm not counting on social audio to be, a core part of the social media experience anytime soon.
Spicy take.
Now I'm going to get a new round of hate mail, but I'm cool with it. I got to stand with what I believe. So
I think
this is what I believe.
Dora, we'll make it really easy. We'll excerpt this and put it on Twitter in a little clip, so that way people can easily take it out of context.
Dunk everyone, dunk away.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I feel like it's so hard to build a new consumer social network nowadays. That is what really strikes me.
But yeah, it's hard. But TikTok
did it.
I know TikTok is a couple years old and has lots of money and all that stuff. But the thing just exploded in a moment where people said there won't be another social app.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know about you guys. I am addicted to
totally.
that thing. And I spend way more time on it than I would on Facebook or Instagram. That's
I guess
for sure.
The distinction between TikTok and why it was able to succeed versus how Clubhouse is doing is that the social graph is totally different. It's not a social graph. It's an interest graph.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like the type of content you're consuming and engaging with is totally distinct from the types of people that you would be following on any pre-existing social network.
It's interesting because sometimes I think TikTok's core innovation, like there's a couple for sure that are really key. But maybe the core innovation is just like universal basic distribution, where like, no matter who posts, like no matter what you post, you're going to get like shown to maybe 100 people, right. and the reaction that those people have will determine if you get shown to more people. And it's like, why don't more platforms do
really
this? It feels like Twitter should do this
that.
With tweets.
It's really disruptive to do that nowadays when most of the social networks work off of some preferential attachment model where the rich just get richer.
Yeah.
If you're influential, you just get more influential. And if you're not influential, no one sees your posts. And TikTok totally turned that upside down.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant. And don't you think that Clubhouse Clubhouse could do that in some way? Like find a way to blast out rooms to everyone in that hallway that they have.
I think so.
Give people, but the thing is when you make a TikTok video, I know there's effort, but it's not like, I feel like so if you're in a boring Clubhouse room or if you're in a poorly attended Clubhouse room, that's like a half hour or an hour of feeling bad,
right?
Whereas like the joy in making the TikTok is there, as you make it and you want to make it as good as you can. And then you throw it out there to that algorithm and see what happens. So I do think that this is one of the reasons why Clubhouse is going to fail is because do you guys know like Disneyland has a way where they rank your good experiences versus your bad experiences?
It's been a while.
So they call the good experiences magic moments and the bad experiences tragic moments. And
I like that.
They've have this algorithm or this sort of not algorithm, but this sort of equation in their minds that If you have 30 magic moments, all it takes is one tragic moment to wipe it out, and you'll have a bad experience. And if you're a content creator and you spend an hour doing a clubhouse that has like 30 people in it, that's like a full hour of tragic moments, and then you don't want to go back again. Whereas TikTok is just filled with magic moments, so that's I don't know. I mean, I'm just riffing here. But,
I think
I just find that interesting.
I think like Clubhouse could achieve that universal basic distribution that you were talking about, Nathan. But I think on the consumer side, it's hard to make it as interesting as the type of content that you see on TikTok. Videos are so short, snappy. You have 30 seconds versus a Clubhouse. I think audio just like it's harder to be interesting on synchronous audio.
Yes.
Agreed. Right. It requires higher trust. Like I think the people who are going to listen to this, for the most part, probably 80% of them will already be familiar with at least one of the three of our writing, right? And like that's what gives them the confidence that this is a conversation that's going to be worth following. When you open up Clubhouse and you see names that you don't know and some topic that sounds maybe all right a little bit, it's just like it's a shot in the dark. Like even just the preview element of like TikTok, like. Well, there is no preview on the For You page, but let's say you go to somebody's profile, you see this little thumbnail that tells you way more than the Clubhouse,
totally
little thing can tell you of like who's in the room right now. So anyway, just like the speed of information in audio is just way, way, way slower.
Yeah.
And it can be rich. Like I love listening to people have interesting conversations. That's why I love listening to podcasts. I like making podcasts. But I think that the podcast format is pretty great because it's like we get to have this. It's a moment in time. We're all here together. It's like set, and there's not like, hopefully we can edit it if we need to. Like, it's like it's pretty good. And I think there's something really special about the most special thing about Clubhouse is like who could show up. It's like, oh, we didn't know that Elon Musk was going to pop in, and then he said that thing, and that was crazy. But like the good versus the bad of live is like where does it weigh out? And I think the bad outweighs the good. Probably.
Yeah, and this is why I think Twitter has such a big advantage because we don't know who can show up on it. Well, if Elon Musk shows up on Clubhouse, it's the biggest day in the app's history. If he shows up on Twitter, it's Wednesday. Right. And so you're just you're already following the people that you're interested in, and you can hop in and out to conversations that they're having all day long. Not to mention they have 1 or 200 million daily active users, where Clubhouse, has much less. So advantage Twitter.
I could imagine Clubhouse. The thing that I could see Clubhouse doing is supplanting podcasts if they build in a recording feature, because it's way easier to record. You could still have some of the live stuff that's like a component of it, and they'd have a back catalog. Imagine if you log into Clubhouse and it's like the sum of all the interesting things that have ever happened there versus what's happening right now, where you like jump in halfway through or whatever.
Yeah. Well,
it does take some of the energy away from the liveness, but like, I feel like that's the trade-off they have to make. It seems like something's fundamentally broken and they have to change something fundamentally. I would guess if I was in their shoes, I would have to think about doing something like that, which is a hard thing to consider if you've got a $4 billion valuation or whatever, but like
they'll have to pivot hard.
It seems like they're going to have to. Well, I guess that's that.
I agree.
Yeah. Cool. Should we talk? I want to talk about what it's been like for you to go from the traditional media context to the independent creator context. Can you just tell us about the decision process and like the story behind it?
Sure. So I was at BuzzFeed for 5 years and left last June to start Big Technology. Which is my newsletter on Substack and podcast, Big Technology Podcast. I left before this whole massive wave from traditional media began. There was very few people that had done it. And
did you do the Substack Pro thing?
No. I didn't even know that existed. I didn't know there was a possibility to get an advance. I just I'd been in touch with Hamish for a while because I was writing a newsletter at BuzzFeed. And I was like, hey, you think I should do this? He said, yeah. I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And then it took a year and a half. I'd actually wrote a story while I was at BuzzFeed about how Substack writers were making good money. And, I liked writing emails and thought, oh, maybe this could be an opportunity for me sometime down the line. So anyways, I wrote to Hamish and was like, hey, I think I'm going to do it. He's like, okay, do it. And I'm like, all right, I'm doing it. And then I did it. And there was no, hey, we'll give you, $300,000 this year.
They were like,
Right,
this
So that
guy's
was
going
that
to
was
do it for
before,
free.
right? Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a couple funding rounds before
Right.
before where we are today. So ultimately, I made this decision after I had written Always Day One, which is the book that I had that came out in April 2020. Which for all future authors out there, I will advise you not to release a book at the beginning of an awful pandemic.
Yeah.
Timing was bad, and I was like, all right, well, I gotta find some way to keep writing about the stuff that I'm interested from the book. And I also just love this idea of being independent, following my curiosity, and not being beholden to the news cycle in the way that I was as a beat reporter at BuzzFeed, which was a great experience. But it was time for me to move on. And it's been a total blast having done that, having made that move from traditional to what's now a pretty vibrant independent journalism world. Um, I guess I just marked down on my calendar like when the year anniversary is of like my post announcing like what I was going to do, and it's coming up pretty soon.
Happy
Oh,
anniversary.
amazing.
And
Congrats.
thank you. And I didn't know what to expect going into this. I thought I'd be doing a lot more freelance writing than I'm doing now. I put all the good stuff in the newsletter, but it's been super fun so far, and it feels sustainable, which is a
Yeah.
great and lovely surprise.
That's awesome. I'm curious, like one of the things we talked about on Twitter is the decision of how to monetize.
Yes.
So it sounds like the decision to go independent was pretty driven by the idea of doing a paid newsletter, but also you do ads.
Yes.
So I'm curious, like, how did ads come about? Do you think about it like you want it to be the main thing, or do you want subscriptions to be the main thing and ads to be a supplement, or how do you think about, or like other stuff, like, I don't know, NFTs, or like you could start a DAO. Lee will be able to ask you about those things that I don't really know about, but yeah, I'm really curious how you think about how to monetize.
Yeah, so I initially was planning to do subscription, and now I'm entirely ad supported, and I think I'll eventually blend the two. But the idea for me was, when I turn on subscriptions, I don't want it. So here's the fear, right? You turn on subscriptions and it's a $40,000 a year business. Then you're screwed because you've limited your distribution and you're not making enough money to sustain the business. And so I wanted to reach a size that will make me feel confident that when I turn subscriptions on, that it will be like $100,000 business or more a year. And in the meantime, I'm going to do ads, and I'll probably keep doing ads even afterward. But I think ads are a proven way to support content. I don't have a natural aversion to them like a lot of people do. I started my career buying ads and selling ad tech, so this is natural to me. And I have a good audience that people want to reach, which means I can charge premium rates. So for me, the idea right now is do it ad supported, see how far I can grow, and then think about what the best way to launch subscription would be, and then make that happen from there. So it's definitely going to be a multi-stage thing. Or, another thing that I've been toying around with is, so I write once a week. And it's like more of a deeper analysis. Something I've been toying around with is like, do I want to end up writing like, maybe 3 or 4 times a week and have it be like more of a news digest or an aggregator, and sort of see if I can grow that way. So I don't know exactly 100% the direction that it's going to go. I'm coming at it every day, willing to risk the core business to build the next thing, which is what I think all businesses should do. But ultimately, right now, the model for me is ads.
Would you advise? I'm curious what kind of advice you would give to other writers about ads versus subs.
Well, I would just say, like there's this. So Nathan, you got into this little Twitter war with Austin of Morning Brew about subscription versus ads. I think you were on the subscription side. Austin was on the ad side.
Beef marketing. It's
beef marketing. And my personal perspective is I'm not beholden to either philosophy. Right. I think you can make money doing both. And so right now I'm making money doing ads. And, I think that doing a combination of ads plus subscription is definitely the way to go, where you use ads to make some of your content free and give it the best reach possible. And then you use subscription to build a deeper relationship with your super fans and give them more of the stuff that they like. And if
Yeah.
you find the right balance to do those two in conjunction, then you've built a very nice business. And hopefully have a satisfying life as well. So
yeah, totally. The thing that I worry about with ads is ads require meetings, right? Especially if you want to sell high cost ads, where you've got to like convince someone that your audience is like high quality, and you got to do the creative in a way that they like it. And bottom of the barrel ads, sure, like you can do without any meetings. You can just probably plug into some marketplace or whatever. But like, do you use a marketplace? Do you do direct sales where you have to have meetings and stuff? Like I worry about time spent not focused on creating things that would be valuable for an audience member, whether it's in front of or behind the paywall.
So we've been sold out the first 6 months of 2021. We sell by the month or the quarter. We do have like a week option to sponsor a week, but we've been selling the month, so we haven't had a need to sell a week yet. And so, sorry, when I say I have a guy that helps me.
Okay.
And I sold the first quarter on my own, but he's been selling the last. He sold like the second quarter.
Cool.
And I pay him commission. He gets paid very well. And ultimately, I guess I learned this because selling the book, and I had an agent, and I work with a speaking agency, and they get a commission. And ultimately, like there's a balance between like doing the content on my own and then having the experts who are well versed in how to do this stuff find a way to sell it. And so and I knew, like, I realized, like, there are times where I'm like, oh, I'd like to do the business side more than I'd like to do the writing, because I find that part exciting. But I basically created the ad sales deck and then handed it over to this guy and said, all right, go crush it. And he's crushing it. And
that's awesome.
And yeah, I think that we're both happy with the agreement. We split the revenue, the percent, not 50-50, but we have an agreement where, we both walk away with enough money that it works. And it's helped keep the business sustainable. So that's been awesome.
Yeah, that's great. So basically you can still focus on just building the audience.
Yeah. And then on the podcast side, I use Red Circle, and they have a sales team that will sell ads. Even with my podcast, we do, 4,000 downloads a week, but that's still large enough for them to go out and sell. And obviously, like the podcast, you guys know this, being podcasters yourselves. Podcasting, if you're going to do it right, you have to be in it for, say, I'm willing to do this for 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And then maybe it becomes, a really good business if you're doing it independent.
Totally.
So for me, that's what I'm looking at. I started in August 2020. I'm happy with where it is right now, but it is a business that takes a very long time to build. Yeah. You got to be patient.
Yeah, totally. This was for sure something when I was at Gimlet. It's so hard to build new audiences for new podcasts. And Gimlet has like world-class editorial teams and like marketing budgets and all this stuff. But people have a very low like Dunbar number for how many podcasts they're going to listen to at any given point. And like discovering new podcasts is like, there's no like, I don't know, there's not a lot of avenues. I mean, this is why people are frankly, I think, excited about like Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces, is because it has greater discovery, I think, than podcasting does. But yeah, I think it really helps to complement a newsletter with a podcast.
Oh yeah.
Because you get like an overall, there's like a thinker who you're interested in, what they're interested in, and they're going to write about it. They're going to talk about it, and you can, whatever medium, it's just, they complement each other. Because I find that the, conversations spark ideas that you may want to write about, and then you write about something and you like really polish an idea and figure out what you think about it, because you sit down, you do some research, and then that generates ideas for who you might want to talk to. And you can talk about it after you've written about it more easily. So there's just I feel like that is the stack for sort of like, whatever, thinkfluencers is writing and podcasting as like the medium.
Yeah, I agree. The podcast to me was honestly like an afterthought. I saw like Brian McCullough, who runs the Tech Meme Ride Home podcast, tweeting about like, the podcast, or he wanted to hire some people. And I was just kind of curious. It was middle of pandemic. I was like, oh, there's still opportunity here. So I called him up,
Yeah.
and it seemed like there was still opportunity. And I just kind of thought it was going to be, there was some opportunity. It would be an excuse to speak to an interesting person every week, where I wasn't, sure if I would get that access once I left BuzzFeed. And man, I mean, it's been super fun, and to watch it grow has been cool. And I think there are, there's this renewed emphasis from Spotify and Apple to increase discovery of new and interesting things. So, and an increased willingness of people to listen to podcasts. I think I did this story last week about how we still only have like 100 million people in the US listening to podcasts, leaving us 200 million people to expand the market to. And with platforms like Spotify and Apple, trying to make podcast a real central part of their business, like there might be a limited number of podcasts one person will listen to, and that's fine. But I think there's been this trope that the podcast market is saturated and everyone has a podcast, don't even bother trying. And I think that's wrong. I think there's a lot of room for growth in this world.
Definitely. Lee, I'm curious, like, besides ads and subscriptions, and whether it be audio ads or video ads, forms of creator monetization that seem top of mind to me, are like crypto based, or kind of like community based, or like course based almost. Like there's just these like other forms of it. I'm curious, what, like, from your perspective, like, do you think that more creators should be focused on this? And then from Alex's perspective, have you considered it? Like, I would be curious, because I'm very much in this sort of like ads and subscriptions world, and like, I'm just very curious to hear what y'all think about those other things that are maybe more emerging.
I think there are myriad ways to monetize as a creator that go beyond ads and subscriptions. And I really liked Chris Dixon's post recently about the demand curve among your audience base, and how basically like every single follower that you have, every single like email sub that you have, they have a different willingness to pay. And charging a subscription basically like is applying this uniform distribution to them. And it leaves money on the table for a lot of people. It excludes a lot of people who can't pay that amount. And like what you want to do is like perfectly price discriminate the way that colleges do with the financial aid office. You're charging people up to like the total amount that they're willing to pay or able to pay. So I think like I would just love to see like more business models that like allow creators to capture the area under the demand curve and better price discriminate among their audience, and offer like, more exclusive premium products to people who are willing to pay more, and maybe offer something less expensive to people who are willing to pay less. For me, like offering the course was an example of this. I offered a course earlier this year. It was a cohort-based course, live, like taught by me 3 hours a week. I created the whole curriculum, and I charged $1,250, $1,250, which, like, I summed it up. I think like it's basically equivalent to like how much, a really good newsletter writer probably makes in a whole year. And that was like one course that took place over 3 weeks. And obviously the people who took it are not your average, like run-of-the-mill passive follower. They're someone who is trying to improve their career, build a business, get insights through which they can start a company. But like, I think that's an example of capitalizing on your super fans, or offering a product that is extremely value additive, and charging a price that is commensurate with that value. It also relates to this post that I wrote last year, 100 True Fans. Like, how can you identify your top,
I remember that one.
Top 100 fans and actually offer them greater value, and be able to like charge a higher price, and be able to like subsist off of 100 true fans. So I think like what I don't like about the creator economy right now is like how much of the dialogue and exploration is it around business models feels really unimaginative to me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
I'm curious if you've considered any like sort of like alternate monetization options from advertising or subscriptions, like, you know, whether it's a course or like a community or like a crypto based thing, like doing NFTs or like creating a, what is it, decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO. Like, does that stuff have any interest to you at all, or like, do you think it plugs in, or are there different? Is it like maybe there's a certain type of creator that it's more right for, or whatever? I'm just curious how you think about these other ways of monetizing.
So I think they're very interesting. Don't laugh at me, but one of the things I've been really curious about is the Twitter super follow, which they've yet to roll out. But for me, I've always thought that like creating a subscription product for big technology would involve some form of community. And, you know, I like that all in one, you can get exclusive tweets, but you could also get, you know, subscriber only newsletters and subscriber only spaces. And I think the subscriber only spaces are really interesting, where you could say, hey, there's a big thing going on in the news. Let's all get together and talk about it on spaces, and I'll try to bring in a guest or two. And when you think about that, you know, people's inboxes are fairly saturated, but what would they pay to be able to be part of that community? You know, there's a chance that you can charge a premium for that. So I will be very interested to see what happens when Spaces comes out, and you know, when the super follow comes out. I don't anticipate myself switching to review. You know, I think I'll probably say on Substack for reasons we spoke about earlier, which is that you become, if you put all your trust in one platform, you can very easily be turned off by that platform. And I don't want to have that sort of liability, even though the stuff I write isn't exactly culture war cancel stuff, but you never know. So, so that to me is really interesting. The one thing I'll say is that thinking about ways to do this stuff, like another reason why I haven't turned on subscriptions right away is because, you know, I don't want to burn out. And I'm trying as best as I can, and it's not always easy, but I'm trying to be mindful about my mental health and the time that I put into this stuff. And it's very easy to add work. It's really tough to subtract it. And I'm trying to figure out how can I end up having the best newsletter, the best podcast, and, you know, remain a healthy person all at once.
Totally. I completely feel that.
I agree. May we all have that.
Year and
I think
change.
it's a good goal to have in mind as creators.
Yeah, totally. I guess on a closing note, what are the things as a creator that have helped you most to avoid burnout and to stay like happy with this sort of independent thing, which can so often feel like a grind?
Yeah, it definitely feels like grind. I think honestly, like getting a chance to speak with folks like you has been helpful. Like, you know, we're part of this community called Type House. I'm sure you've shouted it out before, but like, you know, it's extremely lonely to do this on your own. And so being able to be part of this Telegram group where a bunch of people who are doing it together compare notes, and it's not the most active, but it's still just like, oh, okay, there's other people dealing with similar issues as me, or even like Nathan. I think we've, you know, spoken 4 times over the course of the year. Lee, you and I have spoken like 2 or 3 times, and just having these conversations are always helpful. I mean, of course, then there's like the cliche stuff that's true, but like exercise, sleep, that stuff helps, and learning your limits. So I agreed to do this podcast for Vox called Land of the Giants, which like went into the history of Google and looked through all, you know, through 7 episodes, looked through all the challenges and the opportunities of the company. And that was awesome. But I also learned I probably shouldn't agree to do, you know, another full-time job alongside this full-time job that I have. So that's been helpful. And I won't lie about it. Like, I think seeing good responses, seeing growth, keeps you going. Like, that's what they say. One of the factors of burnout is that you're doing the same thing, but you're not seeing any results from it.
Right.
And so like when I have like a poor growth weekend or week, or like when the when I get like a bunch of unsubscribes from the newsletter or where only a couple people tweet it out, I'm just like, but like when there's a good response, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I love doing this.
Right. Yeah,
so,
totally.
So that's a fact that factors into it. And, I will also say that I'm going to take the month of August completely off. I once heard a CEO who was leaving a company that I was working at talk about how, he had been working his butt off for a long time and had a life debt to pay back. And so he was going to go take his motorcycle and drive across the country for a while until he felt, compelled to return to an office. And, I definitely haven't put in as many years as he has. But, I wrote the book, and that was a year and a half of intense work. And then I was like, okay, then the book will come out and I'll see the world again. And then COVID happened. And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to start this thing, Big Technology. And, then took on the Land of the Giants podcast. And I've been grinding for like literally 3 straight years.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have a bit of a life debt to pay back. So, I won't be hopping on a motorcycle indefinitely, but I am going to take August off and, take a deep breath and smell the roses again.
Incredible.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting.
So thank you so much, Alex, for being here today. Really appreciate your coming on the show. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, really enjoyed this conversation. Best of luck with everything. Enjoy your vacation.
Thank you. Will do. And always great to chat with you both.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for having me on.